Hey everyone, welcome to the Game Dev 101 podcast. I am your host Glenn, and today I am joined by game developer Alec Faulkner. Alec is a designer at Yacht Club Games and was one of the key creative forces behind Mina the Hollower. And correct me if I'm wrong, Alec, but you originated the concept, started the early prototype on your own, and by that point it wasn't even intended as a game that would be publicly released. And then you went on to serve as the game's original director and work deeply on its gameplay and level design. Is that right?
That's all right. Yeah. I've been working on this project at Yacht Club for the last 6 years, and I've been working on this project in general for the last 7, 8 years, maybe. Ugh, yikes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't wait to ask more questions about that. But before we delve deeper into how Meet the Hollower was made, first of all, how are you feeling, Alec, now that the game has been out for over a week? It's the best reviewed game of 2026 so far. It's doing very well commercially. How does it feel to see something that you started as a side project all these years ago turn into such a massive success?
Certainly gratifying and validating. It's hard to look back a little bit since I feel like we're still in it. you know, we're fixing bugs, we're marketing the game. It's gonna be hard to reflect until I can actually take a vacation. I think, but super grateful that people are liking the game, or that people are picking up what we're putting down, so to speak. Really validating overall just to see that there still exists an audience that really appreciates the types of stuff that we value, that being really gosh dang good game design, innovative fun new concepts. It's heartwarming, when you work in isolation for so long. I think it can be easy to let the doubt creep in, and think, are we even relevant anymore? Are people going to care? I mean, heck, this game doesn't even have a battle pass or online multiplayer. Are people going to care? I don't know. It's a whole different world out there. But I suppose some things never change in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, before I go deeper into Mina the Hollower, I'd also like to talk to you about how exactly you joined Yacht Club Games, because I know you joined them in 2016 as an intern, but how exactly did you find your way to them? And feel free to give as much background information as you want, because I'm also very interested in your game dev journey before you joined Yacht Club.
For sure. So I'll just take you back to the start. For
Yeah.
college, I went to USC's School of Cinematic Arts here in Los Angeles, California. I studied game design for 4 years, and in that last year, I saw that there was an internship opportunity at Yacht Club Games.
Mm.
2 years, 1 year prior, I had played the original Shovel Knight on my 3DS. I was in Scotland at the time. I heard it was so good that I made the trek down to my to my nearest McDonald's so that I could use their Wi-Fi to download the game on my
Really?
3DS. And I mean, I just loved it. I Shovel Knight wasn't super on my radar. I'm like, oh, okay, another like retro indie pixel art 2D platformer. Like, sure, I've seen that before. But then this one came out and people were like, no, this one's good. And I thought, a lot of people I respect and admire are saying the same thing. So I played it. I loved it. It seemed like such a focused game that knew exactly what it wanted to be and did it perfectly. And just from a design perspective, I found so much I admired about it, and I was shocked to find out, sometime after that, not only are they also in Los Angeles, but there's an opportunity to work with some of these folks. I applied initially as a pixel artist, since I had been doing a lot of pixel art at that time. Went in, talked to the folks here, Yacht Club, nailed the interview, got the job. And it was pretty soon into it that Sean another designer at the company recommended that I stop doing art and start doing level design, since when we would go to lunch and talk about games and stuff, it became I think pretty clear, maybe faster for others than myself, to identify that I had a lot more to say than just doing the pixel art. And so then I got thrown onto Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment, did all the level designs and such for that game. Worked on other stuff we were doing around that time, some like amiibo content, went on to King of Cards and Showdown. And just to continue the story, from there, we were wrapping up Shovel Knight Treasure Trove around like 2019, and already kind of thinking about what should we do next. Um, and we wanted to do a 3D game, and we still are. That's been a secret background thing for a while, a not so secret.
Yeah.
And we knew we need to. It's hard to make an engine for a 3D game unless you're actually making a game in that engine. And for the longest time, we're doing that as well. We're making our own 3D game engine. And so we wanted to do a 3D game, but we also wanted to keep making 2D games. We wanted to make another Shovel Knight, but we wanted to also like make a game that wasn't Shovel Knight. We had a lot of desires, but not necessarily a project that could fulfill those desires, in a way to like make it all work. And so I was like taking it upon myself in the background in that last year or so of wrapping up Shovel Knight to trying to explore what could be next. I was really into like Game Boy stuff at the time. I have a history with like modding Game Boys for like people on Craigslist and eBay before I had a job. And from a art perspective, it was interesting to me that like no one was really making projects that were playing off of that system's limitations. I thought those were interesting limitations. And the idea started to form of like maybe not a Zelda by way of Nintendo, but like what if there was a top-down action adventure kind of game that took more inspiration from something like classic Castlevania 1, 2, and 3, and Rondo of Blood, especially Castlevania 3, though. I really love that game. And yeah, what started as like a fun little weekend project turned into a full-fledged prototype, pitched it to the team, and here we are 6.5 years later.
And did the side project that you started on your own, was that before you joined Yacht Club, or did you start on that project after you joined them?
No. But yeah, that would have been I think it was like summer of 2018. I was at Disney World. That's where Mina started. That's where the first like entry, the notes in my notes app about what the game should be is, I think. But at that time, of course, I was like still doing all of the like King of Cards like design to get that game out of the door. So it was just a fun weekend project.
Yeah, and it started as a project to hone your skills as a coder and artist.
Yeah, especially I think towards the end of Shovel Knight, and I think this is a good thing. That those skills were getting rusty. In college and such, I would do art for my games and I'd program them and I'd do sound and music and everything, right? But here at the Yacht Club, I ain't got to do all that since we have programmers that are better than me. We have a composer that is far more talented than me. We have amazing artists. And so that's just like not how I can be most useful. But yeah, I wanted to keep those skills sharp. I think I was also really, really impressed just by our tech and our tools here. I love that we have our own collision system and our own combat system and everything that comes along really with like having our own engine. I loved the fine-tuned control over everything in all of our games, and it made me want to like reopen the toy box of some of my old stuff and be like, what if I made some of these tools? Wouldn't that be neat? Wouldn't it be fun to like program my own collision system? that's that's my idea of fun, I guess.
Yeah. But then how did your coding project grow to like a top-down open world Zelda and Souls like inspired game? Like, was there a specific spark that led to the world and the character of Mina?
Yeah, I mean, like all things, it grew one step at a time. At first there was simply a widescreen Game Boy resolution of 256 by 144, and the idea of like a top-down thing. I was replaying Pokemon Gold, I think, at the time
Mm.
too. One of my favorite Game Boy games.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't necessarily at first an idea of like scope, definitely, much less like genre even, or like what the game should be. But once you've got a character kind of like walking around, interacting with collision, the next thought is like, well, I want to like give them some attacks. I don't think I'll ever make a game that doesn't have at least some like action element, right? And yeah, there's certainly love for Castlevania stuff around that time in my heart, and the idea of like a top-down Castlevania was really interesting.
Mm.
Something that had the same really deliberate combat and and a game that would require the player to like think really intentionally about their spacing. Those are things that interested me, and I hadn't seen that before, from this kind of like hammer perspective or in this style of game. Um, and I mean that all just seemed really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays we don't see we see some games with like quote unquote a deliberate combat, right? But we see very few games that are really about like spacing and positioning, the part of fighting an enemy that's like more of a dance than it is simply playing Simon Says and pressing the dodge button when they do their attack, or pressing the parry button when they do their attack. Um, the idea of like bringing that back and doing something new with it is
Mm.
really interesting, because yeah, I don't know about you, but when I play a game, I want my left stick, or my D-pad in this case, to have meaning and to do something. I
Yeah.
want to be using it to move my character around with intention and purpose at all times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it to just be the thing that I hold to go from one encounter to the next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet it seems like for so many action games, that's the extent to which I could really have to think about that left stick. So then we've got the idea of a top-down Castlevania, a thing where you've got a whip with really good range, so you can be at the perfect distance between you and the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you whiff it, then you're going to be locked in a cooldown animation for
Yeah.
enough time to penalize you for messing up. But it's pixel art, so I can't just swap in a model or swap it out later. If I'm going to animate something, I want to
Right.
animate it once, right?
Yeah.
So for that, we got to pick a character, right? I was already like doodling a bunch of characters. I think the first one was like a very like Simon Belmonty looking, like
Mhm.
top down, like Link's Awakening style sprite. It honestly looked kind of badass. The same like 3-color thing, but you can totally tell like, oh my god, that's a Belmont. I had that, and I had some other like characters, and one character in that lineup was the mouse we now know as Mina, right? And yeah, there's a lot of reasons why that one seemed the most appealing at the time. I'll start listing them off. If it's going to be a Castlevania-y kind of game, we're probably going to end up with a lot of like cool environments and cool colors,
Mhm.
as well as like dark environments and dark colors. So you probably want a character that can contrast really well with that. So if a character that is mostly like off white and bright red, that instantly helps a whole lot. The very small size of the character sprite also means that readability is just as an artist, I'm sure it's like you're on hard mode pretty much, right? There's barely any room to convey anything. And so every element of of that character design needs to be very, very clear, and needs to fit in that box in a convenient way. I think Mina as a character design works really well for those issues because she has two massive ears on top of her
Yeah.
head that allow you to find her on screen very easily, as well as convey to the player very effectively like what direction you're facing, just based on
Mm.
like what those ears look like at any given point in time. It gives her a big face that we can use to emote. You want as much space as possible there. And the tail adds some good like secondary motion that can be pleasing. Just that can also help like sell character actions as well. Same with the cloak, you know.
Mm.
When she whips forward, it can be hard to tell exactly what her anatomy is doing, right? But when the cloak settles into place after one frame, that kind of tells you everything you would have needed to know about like the action she was doing and how that animation has resolved. So just a lot of stuff that like makes a lot of sense, I think, for readable, efficient, good character design.
Mm.
Um, and at that point, yeah, she couldn't even like burrow. That's the next
Oh,
thing
really? Okay.
to
So,
figure out.
yeah, because that's what I was wondering. I was wondering if Mina came first or the borrowing mechanic.
Yeah, yeah. So at that point, right, we've got a mouse that can walk around and whip things. Then she had to start jumping around. That really wasn't even a question for me. If
Mm.
you're going to make a game that is riffing on the feeling and certainly the art style of the Game Boy Zelda games and specifically Link's Awakening, I think that conversation inevitably includes the Rock's Feather and the ability to jump in Link's Awakening. Um, I mean, everyone loves that. That's like I think pretty universally, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we come from a background of making platformers, and so of course there's going to be a jump button. That was just never even really a question.
Hmm.
Um, Jumping in any game isn't just there, I think, to be silly or fun or whatever. I think it's a very easy way to get a lot across, you know? Even uh like it's fun to think about gravity. It's fun to try and predict the plot of a projectile in motion in your head. There's a reason that like dogs love playing fetch, you know? Like there's a lot of like innate core fun
Hmm.
that comes from our caveman brains, I think there. And so you know, I love platforming and I love platformers, and there's so much I think you can do there. So obviously, you know, there's got to be a jump button. And so then you've got a character jumping around, whipping things, pretty much a direct kind of like top-down Castlevania style game. Um, and that immediately illustrates one issue, which is that in something like a 2D Castlevania, um, you're essentially in one axis, right? When you're fighting an
Hmm.
opponent or dealing with a challenge, you can be pushing them forward or they can be pushing you back. And so, unless you've gotten pushed back to the beginning of the level, generally speaking, there's always somewhere on that tug of war rope for the player to go.
Hmm.
Whereas when you tilt that camera and make it more of a top-down game, suddenly you can have a corner, you can have an alcove in which you're cornered. At which point, what do I do? Right? You can whip them down and cross your fingers and
Hmm.
hope that you can outdamage them and survive, but that's not going to create super compelling gameplay that would allow the player to play around with it or strategize or be better at anything, right?
Hmm.
So the immediate thought is why not have why not let you like jump over enemies and stuff and get out of danger that way? What if there was a Shovel Knight style pogo even? Those thoughts I think inevitably have to like cross one's mind. But before any of those got too far, I realized that the camera perspective itself is kind of a very limiting factor there. When you're
Mm.
jumping from this like pseudo isometric perspective, it can be really difficult to tell exactly where you are on screen, because if my
Yeah.
shadow is here on the bottom of the screen and my character
Yeah.
sprite is way up above, but I'm not really looking at that shadow, in the heat of combat you might think you're actually up here when in reality you're like down here but just high up, right? It's
Yeah.
inherently confusing. And so I think I identified like, yeah, I can't have the character jump like more than like this much before things just like don't get readable.
Mm.
But that wasn't a scary thing. That's an exciting thing, you know, a new limitation to design around. And Shovel Knight certainly is a character that can jump very high,
Yeah.
and the idea of having another character whose strengths and weaknesses complement that, I think, is
Mm.
also fun and cool. So let's not have the character jump very high, but I wish that, you know, this being a Game Boy game, there needing to be somewhat of an economy around using as few buttons as possible.
Mm.
It'd be great if this like jump button could be evasive in a way that complements this character perspective. Is there a way that I could like jump through an enemy instead of over them? Is there something that this like button could do that I'm not thinking of? And I think there the idea revealed itself that like maybe instead of jumping over the enemies, what would make more sense is if you could jump quote unquote under the enemies, right? Because
Yeah.
when you burrow, there's no longer a distance between my shadow position and my character sprite. Where I am and where I appear to be is exactly the same position. um, so that seemed to just make a lot of sense, you know, and tying it to the same button also can create necessary timing, both getting into and out of the move, so it's not free.
Mm.
Um, you know, I think it's really important when designing fun characters to control that they have strengths and weaknesses alike. You know, Shovel Knight can't attack upwards, right? And that means that you can have danger from above that forces you to move around on the one axis you can control, right? This is how you get fun, engaging setups that require you to use your brain and figure something out and allow space to get better at a game. Um, and so that all seemed to just make a lot of sense. Pairing it with the same button, uh, it could be a move that helps you in combat, which is kind of the impetus behind the idea. But also, it could help you with platforming, right? Since you could like burrow jump across, it can provide some contrast with your default state when you're playing the game running around. Mina normally is like pretty rigid, right? She stops more or less on a dime, and moving around just on the ground in 8 directions is like very simple and controllable. So if you're going to have a cool, you know, other move or other mode, I think that contrast is also fun. Having it be a little faster, a little more slippery, a little something that requires more thought and more planning before you just like jump into it. I think that the timing element was also like strong. Obviously, you know, once you're burrowing down there, the next question is, well, how long can I burrow?
Mm.
If I can do this forever, then I don't need to ever fight an enemy in the game ever. So that's not going to work. uh, and having a pretty short duration on how long you can stay under there, I think is also like a lot of fun. It means when you're
Mm.
jumping up into the air, you're thinking, where am I going to go with this when I actually burrow down into the ground? And it's just enough time that you have enough wiggle room to plan for one action, essentially. I want to get to
Yeah.
this side of the enemy. I want to get behind the enemy. I want to back up a little bit. I'm just going to stall in place because the enemy is going to do an attack that passes over me. Whatever it is you're thinking and doing, it felt like a good amount of time for one decision and in one action. And yeah, at that point, you've got a wonderful move that can accomplish so much with so little. I think it can help in all facets which the game wants to test you on. It can help in combat. It can help with your platforming, and it can help with navigation and exploration in general. Since obviously, if we can burrow places, then we need to be able to like burrow under things, burrow into secrets, go under fences, into little mouse holes and such. And at that point, an identity, I think, is starting to form pretty clearly, right?
Mm.
That's the basics of the game right there.
Yeah.
And it kind of just went from there. You mentioned the like the world and how it became more fully formed and all of that. uh, I I think when it comes to the aesthetics and the tone of the game and the setting and the time and the place, I think all of that comes from just the kind of stuff I was interested in and where our brains were at, in like
Mm.
the around that time, 2018, 2019. Spectre
Mhm.
of Torment came out in 2017, and that's a very like Halloweeny themed
Yeah.
game, full of like skeletons and ghouls and stuff. We liked working on that game a lot, and it was a natural fit, I think, for things we're interested in, our sense of humor, and so the idea of doing another thing like that, I think, was appealing in the midst of working on King of Cards, which is very much a ostentatious kind of comedy game. So yeah, maybe that's why something that kind of straddles those lines, that can have moments of tragedy but also moments of levity, seemed like it would be fun. And also, if you're doing like a top-down Castlevania, isn't part of that it should be like spooky and Halloweeny,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Another thought I think around that time is that there's just like no Halloween games, you know?
Mm.
Here at the
Interesting.
Yacht Club, we love, celebrating some things annually. It was just May, so we
Mm.
did Mega May, an annual tradition where we all play a bunch of Mega Man games, right?
Mm.
What do we do in October? That you could play Castlevania. That's kind of it, right?
Mm.
Like Costume Quest, I think that's great, but I don't want to like do a whole RPG just to get in the trick or treating kind of mood. Why aren't there more like Halloween games? There's a lot of horror games, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
lot of Halloween games. So add all that up, and I think you get the start of Mina the Hollower.
Yeah. Cool. And then, yeah, you worked on that prototype. I think you call it the Gothic prototype. You worked on it for about a year, and then you pitched it to Yacht Club. Um, did you feel confident when you showed it, or were you nervous?
Um, I, I suppose I felt confident. I mean, I'd thought through many elements of the game's design. I knew there was interesting, good stuff in there that my coworkers would appreciate. I think I knew that because so much of what I appreciate, and where my own game design sensibilities come from, is the same people as from Yacht
Mm.
Club. In college, I think you learn one set of skills, and then in the real world, you inevitably learn another, right? And when I joined the Yacht Club, just listening to and hanging out with everyone there, I think really helped solidify a lot of like existing tendencies of mine in the games I was making, into something more of like a holistic ethos about game design. And so I knew that my coworkers would love it because I love it, and we all think the
Mm.
same.
What do you think that they responded to first? Was it like the mood or the mechanics? Was it the character or maybe the potential for a new IP?
I think the game design first and foremost,
Mm.
as is often the case with us, right? There were interesting ideas in there about combat and platforming, and about like the box in which a game like this could exist, that I think tickled the brains of all the rest of the people at the Yacht Club. We had, prior to this, tried to make like a Zelda.
Mm.
We had tried to split the teams into, and for a while, I was leading the design of King of Cards, while
Mhm.
another internal team was working on a prototype for a Zelda looking thing that never ever saw the light of day.
Huh.
And while we had a lot of ideas about the concept of that game and the world of that game and the story and the characters, there's a lot of like pre-production style stuff that had gone into it.
Mhm.
I think there were some things that weren't necessarily sparking a lot of imagination or ideas from the team. Or maybe that just wasn't happening because we had split the teams in two and we only had half of everyone's input. I'm not sure. Um, but that game would have been like another one in the same NES color palette and resolution. After so much Shovel Knight, I think we were like getting pretty sick of that.
Hmm.
It's not a good palette, by the way. It's a horrible palette. It has 100 greens and blues and like one red. It's the worst. One yellow, which is my favorite color. I hate it. So like Game Boy, that it's a similar 8-bit style with similar like limitations, but entirely different ones at the same time. Um, Making a game with small spacing constraints, I think, is something we like doing and is also incredibly difficult. So the idea also of what if we had even less space to work with because it's a Game Boy game instead of an NES game, I think we're the type of sickos who got excited about that for some reason. And theming wise, certainly maybe was a little bit more like in our wheelhouse or immediately fun or like easy for other team members to riff on. And so I think it was more just like providing an answer for a question that we all kind of already had in our brains, which is like, what would our Zelda look like, and what should that look like, and what should that feel like? So I think that's what like really grabbed people, was that there were answers to a lot of those questions, and exciting gameplay systems as on top of all that. Be it the burrowing or the feeling of the combat in general being, something more hit stunny versus knockbacky, and the healing system on top of all of that, which is, it's its own beast entirely. I think everyone was excited about all that stuff.
Yeah. And like once more people became involved with the game, was there at any point that you felt protective over the original idea as it was growing now?
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We work a lot as if we're a Nintendo, and when it comes to a Nintendo, you don't really have, at least visibly to the outside, key figures associated with the games often, nor people who make the game more about them than the game itself. There's never that thought. The best thing that could happen to that project is that it grows beyond what I could ever do alone, and we all run with it, and the opinions of everyone at the Yacht Club are incorporated. Even if I made that game on my own, I would still want all of that because I love and I trust these people, and I think they're all brilliant and geniuses. And so I don't think the thought is ever, are they going to ruin it? I think the thought is always, oh, thank God I have all of these people. They're going to make all of this so much better in ways that I can't even predict yet.
Right.
Yeah, that confidence, I think, in this team has never faltered for me ever. And that's why it's where I've worked for the last 10 years.
So like there was nothing like you had to fight for to preserve, something that you personally really liked about the original prototype?
No, I don't think so. If people are giving me feedback, then it's for a reason, regardless of whether that's the solution we should go with or not. The thing that I was most hesitant about, I suppose, was maybe like what we're going to do with the scope of it in general. Originally, what I had pitched was what I was already thinking about making, which is a game that I have the means to make on my own, which is to say it would have been like an hour long. It would have been just like Castlevania 1. You play through like 5 stages and then it's over. There's like one cutscene at the start that's like 10 seconds long, and there's like one cutscene at the end that's like 10 seconds long, and that's it. No dialogue, not much story, very linear Shovel Knight style level design, since that's where my head was at that time. That's what I had kind of like pitched. Obviously we did not make that game. We made something with a scope far, far larger, but even then that's not me thinking we should do one thing and then us doing another. That's me bringing it to this team for a reason, and that is to hear what everyone thinks. And yeah, it became clear, I think, pretty quickly that while that could be a game that's fun to make and fun to play, I don't think that's the game that people want us to make. I
Mm.
don't think that. I think people would be a little disappointed if they booted up our take on Zelda and it ended up being a game with like fun, interesting new combat, but nonetheless a very similar, very linear structure akin to Shovel Knight. I think that would have disappointed people, and I think I'm right about that, because after we did our demo, the most consistent thing I was reading was like, I hope the rest of the game isn't this linear. And when I
Mm.
read that, I thought,
Right.
oh boy, are y'all in luck.
Okay, and so yeah, your role kind of evolved from being the director of the game, I suppose, to more working on level design and gameplay.
hmm
Looking back now, are you glad your role evolved the way it did, or would you maybe have preferred to stay on as a director?
Uh, I'm not glad things evolved the way that we did, but I'm super happy that all of those changes happened.
Mm.
Um, to give some background, we had been working on two games at once, that 3D game that I had
Yeah.
mentioned prior, as well as Mina. Neither project was going as well as it ought to have been.
Mm.
And we, had been hiring up, increasing the size of the company, staffing up, trying to like make it work. And I think both projects were just struggling. Uh, that has an impact on morale, but it also has an impact on finances. And
Mm.
eventually you start running out of money. So in 2014, or so it's 2024, oh god, in January of 2024, that's when the problem, I think, was like too big to ignore. And so
Mm.
since Mina was closer to being done, we decided, okay, we all need to like pile onto Mina. And if we're doing that, then yeah, Sean should absolutely lead the game. I think he's a lot better at managing people, and he can fill in a lot of my blind spots as well.
Right.
And at that time, the macro level stuff in the game, some of the structure stuff, some of the like, how are these overworldy areas going to fit in? How are we going to balance all of this? He came in and really like tackled those like large issues like that. And it freed me up to focus on the more moment to moment stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
crafting all of the levels and the world through which you play the game. And yeah, am I happy that that happened? Absolutely. I think we should always be playing to our strengths
Mm.
and, working together to make the best game possible. But it's also a little sad, a little bittersweet. I wish that our more grand ambitions could have worked out. I
Yeah.
wish that we could have multiple projects at once so that we could release more games. We certainly have no shortage of ideas, and
Mm.
as much of as our fans don't like us taking so long to release stuff, we don't either. We want to move on with our lives and put new games out. So it's sad, I suppose, that I think, at least for now, that doesn't seem like it's in the cards for us. Going forward, I think we have learned the hard way now a couple times. We need to be a one team studio.
Yeah. One game at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's good and bad. I'm glad we've like found our groove again,
Mm.
and can get back to actually like putting some stuff out. And I'm excited to jump onto the other project now that Mina's wrapped up.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a bit more about the Game Boy Color inspiration and sort of the visual constraints. Did the limitation of making like a Game Boy Color inspired game, did that make decisions harder or easier?
I think both. Harder, certainly, in the sense that everything is way harder. um, it's a game that is gameplay wise very much about different layers. I'm under the ground,
Mm.
I'm on the ground, I'm above the ground. and yet it is a game wherein we are forcing ourselves to never use any transparency, something that is really useful for showing one thing is over another,
Mhm.
right? Uh, just in general, like also making a game with combat and encounters that are as deep as like a Dark Souls in such a super constrained art style, yeah, I'm sure that makes that job very difficult as well.
Mm.
But for both of those things, I think it helps too. It helps it can help
Mm.
to like put you in a smaller box, that can put you closer to the answers that you need to find, as opposed to if you have no limitations holding you anywhere. The question is not, we can do anything, what should we do? The question is always instead, what can we do that would work on a Game Boy? And I think
Mm.
that that helps just get to decision making faster. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's good and it's bad. Something we've said like at the Yacht Club before is I don't like thinking outside the box. That's overrated. I like thinking inside of a
Yeah.
box. And being really good at that box specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like you were very like strict about sticking to those constraints. Were there ever like moments that you broke out of those constraints? Because I know with Shovel Knight, there are some things where it would not have been possible on an NES. Is that
Certainly.
also true for Mina the Hollower?
Yeah. And I think we're taking the exact same like style of liberties there. For Shovel Knight on the NES, we added 4 extra colors to the palette. A beige because there just wasn't one, and Polar Knight sprite wasn't working without it. A couple of like more brown colors so that we could have characters with darker skin tones. You just couldn't do that on the NES. They didn't think about
Yeah.
that, I guess. And beyond that, of course, it's a game with a widescreen resolution. I think if you just
Mhm.
make a 4x3 game, it's
Yeah.
gonna, as much as I wish we could do that, I think that'll just give people they'll
Mhm.
say yuck, or they'll think, oh, this is an old game when it's not. And that's just a difficult uphill battle. So screw it. Let's not fight that
Yeah.
battle.
Yeah.
Um, and that's more or less it. The other limitations from Shovel Knight tend to just be things that we don't think like have value. Like we're not going to do like sprite flickering when there's like too many things on the same
Right.
line, because that
Yeah.
doesn't like make a game better.
No.
It would just it would just be doing something uh, that would only be for people that are so old that they remember that. For
Right.
everyone else, they would just think, "Oh, this game's like glitchy or bad."
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't have
Right.
value if you're trying to make a good game with classic timeless appeal.
Mm.
And so for Mina, yeah, we're just taking that same tact. Color palette wise, things are a bit different though, right? The Game Boy Color doesn't necessarily have a fixed palette of exactly these colors for every single game. That range of possibilities is busted wide open. And you can have any colors, but of course, games weren't doing that. They were still programmed with like more or less fixed palettes. They're still programmed with the intention of like, you can only have this many colors per sprite. You can only have this many sprites on screen. You can only have this many palettes in memory at a time for those sprites. So you still ended up with games with like a cohesive look and feel to their
Mm.
colors, but they weren't necessarily always the same colors. So we thought, okay, let's nail that. Let's make our own fixed color palette, but one that's like all our own. And certainly we'll make it perfect, and we'll address all of the issues we had with the NES palette, and there'll certainly be no need to edit it ever. Uh, and now that we're at the end of Mina, boy, do we have a lot of complaints about this palette. And when it comes to stuff like the music in the game, for Shovel Knight, we used just regular old NES style chip tunes along
Mhm.
with the VRC6 expansion chip for some Famicom games like Castlevania 3. Um, so it's a sound that's fuller than most games on the NES, but still absolutely within the realm of possibility, and certainly in a handful of games that did come out. There wasn't really a direct equivalent for that for
Mhm.
the sound in Mina, and Game Boy. Those 4 channels
Yeah.
on their own is, it's the leaves, it left a little bit lacking. Can we like
Mhm.
spruce it up a little bit? I remember at some point pitching to Jake, like, what if you just had like 2 Game Boys? So it's the same 4 channels, but you just had 8 of them.
Right.
Would that help? But ultimately, like, we needed a little bit more range just so that the
Mhm.
music in the game can have more emotional range.
Mm.
And so it was Jake's idea to pair some MSX style sounds in there to kind of address some weaknesses of Game Boy sound. So another instance where it's like, this is technically possible. We feel comfortable putting this in the game, but yeah, it's not necessarily how you remember most Game Boy uh, games sounding, probably. And when it comes to other limitations, like 3 colors per sprite, much like Shovel Knight, we adhere to that as much as possible. Sandy, who
Mhm.
is the lead pixel artist on this game, I think he took that mission to heart, like, very strongly, and even more so than Shovel Knight. That attention to detail and that consistency should be there. Yet it's the same thing where if it's like, let's just break that rule right here.
Right.
No one will
Yeah.
notice. It's like not worth our time and effort to think of a different way. I mean, sometimes that is appropriate, just so you can release a game and not spend forever working on it.
Mhm.
So I'd say it was the exact same approach, and
Okay.
I think that stuff is great, not just because it's cute to us old heads, but also because it creates a very cohesive experience that I think comes across as timeless, and people can feel even if they can't quite describe what it is we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you also maybe talk a little bit about the engine? I know it's a custom engine. Is it the same one that was also used for Shovel Knight?
It's not the same engine that was used for Shovel Knight, but a lot of the tools are the same.
Mm.
We had wanted to, make a game engine that was more flexible, that could be used for any number of our future projects. I think a lot of studios have the same thought. The Shovel Knight one was cobbled together very quickly, on
Mhm.
account of it needing to have a playable demo and a Kickstarter campaign and everything
Right.
out the
Right.
door
Yeah.
within like a month or two into the project. And unfortunately, we didn't realize we also signed up for another like 5 or 6 years of Kickstarter stretch goal fulfillment,
Mhm.
and ended up making a whole bunch of prequel games and side stories in that same engine. And so we always knew, like, we will, for our next game, we will not use this. We will use a new thing. It'll be used for 3D games and 2D games. It'll be the
Mm.
perfect Yacht Club engine. It's called Propeller because it's the thing at the back of the boat that pushes it
Right.
all forward.
Cool.
And yeah, we that was just a given. And so by the time we finally were done with all the Shovel Knight stuff, we were able to move really quickly because we
Yeah.
had an
Yeah.
engine kind of set up for us already. And a lot of that stuff is more like under the hood when it comes to like how things are constructed or how things are rendered. I don't have to worry about that much with my job, thankfully. And for the sake of making a efficient development, we decided to use a lot of existing tools on Shovel Knight that were still, great tools. All of the levels are all constructed in an open source program called Tiled that we love, very dearly. Our hitboxes and such are assigned to animations via a tool called Cutter that we used on Shovel Knight, and has roots going back to days at Way Forward, where a lot of my coworkers came from.
Mm. Yeah.
There's some elements of it that are very very familiar for us
Mhm.
already, but uh, nonetheless was time to unveil a new stack on top of which all of this other stuff is built.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'd like to talk more about Mina's combat design because I'm wondering how it kind of developed. Because um, it's far more deeper than I thought it was going to be when I started playing. So I'm wondering, yeah, how it just evolved over the years.
Yeah, it evolved a lot, and it had evolved slowly, I think, as we would implement new ideas and try things out. I'd say, like, I mean, it was just a lot simpler at the beginning. You know, there was one weapon, the whip. There was one combat response. When I hit an enemy, they shake for exactly this many frames,
Mhm.
right? There was, only a couple sidearms, that being the axe and the boomeranging knife.
Yeah.
Um, and both of those are simple ranged projectiles. You know, there's 14 or 15 sidearms in the game now, and they're very different, right?
Hmm.
Um, the your health bar and the healing mechanics. I mean, that was there from the start, but all of the trinkets and whatnot that allow you to change how your health and your healing works, those certainly weren't implemented either.
Hmm.
We had a really solid core, and like anything, we want to make game content that doesn't simply get added on top of other systems or other ideas, but it always meshes with those other ideas, complements it, or makes you change how you think about another part of the game.
Hmm.
I think we just took that same approach. But Shovel Knight is like not about its combat, it's much more about its platforming. And so, in order for that game to be its best self, we shouldn't be making, complex like fights with characters, with like elaborate tells and wind up animations and mechanics, because at the end of the day, Shovel Knight has two attacks he can do
Yeah.
that provide a very like fixed response. But none of that is true in for Mina anymore. And the more like level content we add, the more platforming you have to do, the more hazards and stuff that are um, coming your way as you're trying to go through an area in Mina, the more that affects the combat, because it affects where you stand, and it affects what you can do from the position in which you are standing. All of these things are a lot more like intertwined, I think, in Mina. And so when we would advance one element, it would arise, it would bring to light questions and answers with another element. Um, there was no like metal floor at first, but if this is a game where you can burrow, it should also be a game where sometimes you can't burrow, and therefore that it creates a feeling of fear within
Hmm.
the player. Um, if you can burrow under some attacks, well, there ought to be different attacks that you can't burrow under. A guy that like plucks you out of the ground, or a wave of fire that like goes through the earth and hits you out of the ground. And if we're going to do what we usually do, which is create, all sorts of challenges and combinations and permutations of things the player can and can't do in different scenarios, with a game like this, then yeah, that I think that just inevitably creates a much deeper combat system given enough time to marinate. Um, and as we went, we had to like learn a lot about like what works and what doesn't. Especially given how much freedom Mina has under the ground and navigating around enemies, it became even more important to find good ways of making the player not do that, making the player actually fight things.
Hmm.
Then again, you don't necessarily want every enemy to glue to you the second that they're aggroed and keep up with you. Um, so we had to do things like establish kind of a set of best practices, like when you aggro an enemy, they need to aggro like as quickly as possible, and they need to be a threat as quickly as possible.
Mm.
We need to find ways of making it so that you can't simply spam down enemies, especially given that when you hit them, they freeze and they stop in place, right? At least briefly, momentarily. And you need that freeze so that way it can cancel out essentially the cooldown time after doing an attack. So that way, if you miss the attack, you're vulnerable. Whereas if you hit the attack, you're more or less, you've traded your vulnerability time. But yeah, that makes a scenario where it can be easy sometimes to keep the enemy at bay, and we don't always want that. We had to introduce other combat responses. Some enemies, when you hit them, they do get knocked back, or some enemies they like really don't. We had to introduce like shields and some attacks in some states that would like block your attacks. I mean, yeah, we just kept going with it, and we kept doing the things that I think we knew would work best because all of us have played a whole billion action games before, right? We love it. Um, and at no point did the thought cross our minds like, is this too much for a Game Boy game, or is this like not fitting? I think the mindset was always more just like, yeah, it's going to be so awesome to have like this level of control and this level of depth in a
Yeah.
game that you would like never expect from this kind of art style or perspective. And I'm glad it seems to be landing, at least with you.
Yeah, I have been playing nothing else but Mina since it came out, and I have to say
Hell yeah.
there are so many different enemies in the game. Just a ton of enemy variety. Was it hard coming up with that many designs, or did ideas just kept coming naturally to you and the team?
um I don't know. We can always come up with more ideas. I think about any game, including our own, and especially other people's games too. We always seem to have a lot of ideas for what would be cool, or what would like riff on or accentuate the design goals of whatever game it is we're talking about. Um, so it wasn't that hard, but there certainly are a whole lot of enemies. And I'd say the bigger problem is that we at times maybe didn't have uh, the differing perspectives that maybe we needed at that moment. You know, people have their habits and tendencies is more the issue. You know, and so we ended up with like a lot of enemies that would like hit you from afar with a projectile, right? Because in my brain, that's like, you know, I really like doing that. Whereas another designer might, you know, really like enemies that fly around or whatever. So I think the danger was more that, yeah, we were like not realizing we were getting into the same patterns and needing, I mean, that's yet another advantage of folding the teams together, is getting that input from other people and realizing, oh yeah, that has been a blind spot. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious, were there maybe enemies that like looked good on paper but then didn't work once placed in a room?
Um, Certainly, yeah, that always happens, but that's never due to the idea itself. Usually, that's always something that can be like fixed through
Okay.
its implementation. When the way that we design is very like front to back, I suppose, and we're like very rigid about that process. You know, a design gets written up by either me or Sean, um, saying exactly what the thing is, in this case, the enemy, exactly what all their moves are, how big they are, what they look like, mock-ups for like what that should look like, and I think more importantly, you know, sentences and bullet points about what it should feel like, and what it is forcing the player to do that is different than other enemies in the game. And we only move forward once everybody is in agreement that that is a cool idea that is going to be fun and will work in this area and will complement the other enemies that are planned for that area. We figure all of that out before anybody does anything. That's all done before Sandy, you know, draws a single pixel on the screen. But then, you know, we make all of that art. You know, we don't prototype it with like crappy art. We don't. We commit to our ideas, I'd say. And then when the programmer begins working on the enemy, they already have the exact design for what it should be, and all of the art and all of the animations. At which point, we don't go back and rethink something, because then we would have to redraw it. Um, so we've gotten in the habit of trying to work in that manner, because we view it as being very, very efficient, as well as it being um, a set of practices that forces you to come up with the right idea the first time.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk more about level design as well. Earlier, you mentioned that you originally pitched it as a linear game with about, I think you said 6 levels. How did that evolve into the open world? Was that like immediate feedback you got from your coworkers, like we need to make this more open world, this can't just be linear? Or was that more of a gradual evolution?
um, it was pretty gradual, I'd say. I think, we knew that, like, this is a game where you can go 4 directions. I can go up, down, and left, right. Shovel Knight, I can only go like left and right. So why can I go in more directions if there's no reason to? If I just ought to go from room to room, right? It seems like a fundamental element of the game that if it were missing,
Hmm.
uh, it would feel missing to people. Um, but how we accomplished that, I think, was always more of a question throughout development than I wish it were, or maybe it should have been. Since at no point did we desire to make a what I think comes to mind when someone says an open world game. When I hear that, what I think is it's like a normal game, but like stretched out over a massive field. And instead of it taking me 5 seconds to find something cool, it takes me 5 minutes. And I
Hmm.
don't like that. I think that's boring. Um, so the so how do you accomplish that? How do you have a world that feels large, that feels
Hmm.
like it is giving you that sense of adventure that comes through exploration, when what you want to make is something with design that is tight? You know, uh, I. I just look at it in those kinds of like raw numbers like that, and Link to the Past. How long does it like take me to walk from one screen to another? Like 5 seconds, right? Like 6 seconds, maybe.
Hmm.
And what's on a screen in Link to the Past? Like some enemies to fight, like some rupees or whatever, but also like usually like one unique bespoke thing, at least for that area, be it like a gameplay idea or like an NPC or a shop or a little side quest or whatever. Um, that means by definition, every 5 seconds I can see something cool and new. Whereas in something like a Breath of the Wild, the game doesn't have 80 enemies like Link to the Past. It has 10. And it doesn't take 5 seconds to walk to another screen. It takes 5 minutes to walk over a hill so you can see a different thing. Um, None of that is appealing to us. I
Hmm.
think we want to make games that really respect the player's time and are always giving them but an interesting, fun challenge, and a unique challenge. Where we don't like asking people to just do the same thing twice. And so, very early on, we were like thinking about all those questions, trying to talk about solutions and figure it out. Um, FromSoft games have a structure somewhat similar to this, right? Those are
Hmm.
certainly like big open games that you explore, that you don't rely on a map to get around. In fact, there is no map in all of them except Elden Ring, I guess. But even that like is more of a suggestive map than it is
Hmm.
like a literal one. Um, that seemed like a good place to start in terms of like how we might want to structure a game like this. Um, but we immediately run into some issues, right? And in a game like that, it's in 3D, so that when I'm standing here, I can see that that's over there.
Right.
Whereas in Mina, you can only see what's on the screen at any
Hmm.
given time. So we came up with a bunch of ideas for like how we can keep those little like loops of exploration smaller. similar to something like Resident Evil 4 or something,
Mm.
where you get into an area that provides avenues for exploration and is open, but it always kind of loops back on itself, letting you know, like, oh, and that's how this connects to this,
Mm.
and giving the player opportunities basically to load things into their brain, but also to eject the things from their brain. Because I don't know about you, I can only hold like three things in my brain at one time, right?
Mm.
And so you have to construct levels that show you, oh, hey, there's a thing up there, but then also show you like, hey, there's nothing back there. You like did this part and look, now you're here. Therefore, like you don't need to worry about that anymore, right?
Mm.
And so I think that it mostly just manifested as like very, very deliberate, very intentional game design, or level design rather,
Mm.
that is always thinking about not only what is in the room, but like what is before it and after, and how it is going to connect, and how the way in which it connects can also be as like interesting and unique as the content of the room itself. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. That was all just like super hard. It took a while, clearly,
Yeah.
and the this the structure of it also kind of necessitated a different approach, because if you're going to have if it's going to be Disneyland style, where you've got like a town in the middle and points of interest, spread out in a perimeter around that, or I guess kind of like Majora's Mask style,
Mm.
that means that we know that town will be interesting to return to, because it has to be, and that'll, it'll be full of content, of course. And we know that those areas at the furthest points of the map aren't going to be that interesting to return to, right? Because they end with a boss fight that you've already done, right?
Mm.
Just by definition, right?
Yeah.
But that middle space in between, uh, that's the big question. What do you do with that, and how can that be engaging to run through multiple times? And so I think that's where we had to do more than a Souls game would have to figure out in that regard. How do we
Mm.
have like puzzles and such that are fun to think about when you're walking back, as opposed to when you're walking forward through the area? Because when you're
Mm.
walking back, you have a piece of knowledge in your brain that you didn't have before, or you have a key that you found in the level that you could use for any number of locks. And maybe if you open all the locks in one area, that'll only encourage you to be like, maybe on my downtime in between the big, scary, difficult areas, I should instead explore this little part of the map.
Yeah.
Stuff that just gets you moving around and plotting different courses of like how I'm going to move around and where I'm going to go based on what you have at any given time, either in your pocket or in your head. And yeah, that stuff took the most amount of work. I'd say that was like the first thing that we had to really, really figure out after we folded those teams together back in 2024. Until that point, we really only had, the quote unquote like core levels of the game, aka like when you see that like big panorama when you like go to a new area.
Mm. Yeah.
Basically, from that point until the boss were the
Right.
only like chunks of game that we had, and they're all assembled in a way that wasn't like really interconnected at all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, figuring out ways to make that both fun and interesting and less frustrating was difficult. We had to figure out the mirror warping system. We had to figure out where train stations are going to be.
Mm.
We had to make sure that all of these systems unfurled themselves in a manner that was both natural and intentionally delayed. We don't want to overwhelm the player, and we want them to always have something to be thinking about or like looking forward to. And then you've got a big map of what the player where they can go and when, and all of those
Mm.
things aren't necessarily the same for any given player. Yep, fun to level design.
Yeah, I have to be honest, like for the longest time, I didn't know that Mina was open world. And I actually became more interested in it when I learned that it was open world, because I really like exploration in video games. But I agree with you. Like, I don't want to spend 5 minutes in an open world before I stumble onto something. So, yeah, I think games like Elden Ring and modern Zelda games, they do it very well in terms of open world design. And yeah, I think Mina does a fantastic job, like presenting this open world and having all of these secrets, and you just jump from one secret to the next, and yeah, it's just amazing.
I appreciate it, and especially by the end of it, I think I've started to look at it in a similar way. Maybe we should be marketing it as it. We made like top down 2-dimensional Elden Ring, because I
Yeah,
think structurally that's probably the closest.
yeah, I'd say
Probably.
so. Yeah, because it's very Souls inspired. The combat and the yeah, sort of structure of the game, how it just loops into itself. Yeah. I'm wondering, when you were designing areas for the game, how did you decide on like the central idea for an area? Did you like start with a mechanic or a theme? Was there maybe like an enemy you had in your head, and then you design an area around that enemy?
Yeah, we plan it all out at the start, and I think the first question is for designing a world like this. The first question has to be aesthetic or environmental, right? Okay, where do you
Mhm.
go in this game? Are we gonna have like a snowy area? Are we gonna have like a swamp? Pinning down those things. That's the first step, right?
Mm,
Then I think the second step for us is what makes this swamp interesting, what makes this snowy level different, adding twists onto it that are either in narrative or in gameplay or in colors that you might expect from something like that. Um, once that's like feeling good, and
mm,
it would provide a fun sense of fantasy and adventure. um, we look at all the colors. We make sure, okay, these are going to be distinct. Okay, we have one that's blue, we have one that's green. Oh no, we forgot red. Where's the red going to be? I'm sure you've seen like maybe when people post images online where it's like one frame for like every second of a movie or something, and you can
yeah,
just tell like, oh yeah, this whole movie's like gray.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's whatever the game equivalent of that is
Mm,
what we're trying to avoid. And then you got to start working on one area, right? Let's say it's like the crypt, Queensberry Crypt, one of the first ones we did. Then you start thinking, okay, what kinds of like enemies and objects are going to be in here for the player to interact with? For us, our like golden rule has kind of been like 5 unique enemies to any given area and 5 unique gameplay objects. For the crypt, I mean, what do we got? There's that like torso that splits into 2 pieces independently. That's like 3 enemies right there. There's like Bone Bird who like flies at you. That's a 4th. And the little purple slime gooper. I suppose he's the 5th, right? Maybe I'm forgetting some. I guess those worms, yeah,
mm,
those count. And then for objects, yeah, you've got those rollers that like go back and forth. Those arrow traps that like shoot an arrow when on a timer when you like step on a button. Um, as well as for that level, we're counting like some of the more simpler gameplay objects that are more prevalent through the game, like just moving platforms, going under fences in general, things like that. When we're designing all of that, you want to consider it both as a set and as individual elements.
mm,
Um, it's good, I think, when combined together, all of those things that create a identifiable feel. For the crypt, there's a feeling of like uh, it's almost Indiana Jonesy.
mm.
There are precarious traps everywhere that feel like they are specifically designed to say "screw you, player." uh, it has like that. It has that kind of feeling, whereas something like the Bayou has a very like open feeling, and the enemies and objects that are there are more about uh, I'd say like very intentional aggro. Everything in there is something where like the second you show up, they all pay attention, basically. Be it like, the merman that runs at you at 1,000,000 miles an hour, or the boss itself that like stalks you throughout the level and pops up and tries to bite you. And once we kind of know, like, yeah, this level have like this feeling, and these elements seem like they could work well together, you start designing the individual elements themselves. And when it comes to that, I think for me, it's my tendency often, I've noticed, to always try and like subvert some expectation or put some kind of like twist on something. That's why like King Knight grinds on ice, and you can use it to do like to go right into his spin as opposed to just slipping on it. Or how Mina can like burrow through the water instead of simply falling in it and dying. Finding ways to make it essentially such that the player thinks, oh, I haven't like seen that before. That's what we want to do there. And then then you just balance it and consider it as an individual element on top of that. Is this fair? Like, can I design a room around it, right? Is there enough flexibility here with the other things that are in the level that I have enough to play with that I can make 60 rooms in a row of totally unique combinations of things that create different challenges that the player has to approach differently. And at this point, it's less of a conscious thing and more just our process, I suppose.
Right.
This is how all the levels have gone from Shovel Knight to Mina and beyond, I'm sure.
One of the maybe main talking points about Mina is its difficulty. So I'm wondering, how did the team think about difficulty? Because the opening hours of the game can be especially challenging. I think once you start getting into the game, unlocking more things, it gets easier along the way. So were there maybe like debates internally about how hard the opening hours should be?
No. And I'd say that the team is a little surprised, but not that surprised, that this has become a talking point at all, really. I think we approach difficulty the same way we always have. We want to make a game that is challenging, but ultimately fair, right? A game where when you are killed, when the player is punished, they think not that was impossible, and instead they think, well, I shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. It was this close, or I could have done this, right? I think more than anything else, what's changed is the landscape and the people playing the games. If I'm being honest, I think that there aren't. Back in the day, there weren't a lot of games, and so all of them were new. And when you picked any of them up, you didn't know how to play it, and that was cool and fun and exciting. And if a game played the same as another one, that would be lame and not exciting. I think the mindset has shifted a little bit, and something that is new is seen as like scary and uncomfortable. And some people, when they encounter that, they may think to themselves, well, the game is the problem, because I know how to play games, because all these genres have solidified so much, right? I know how to play an action game. I roll out of the way, and that's not working in this one. So it's bad, and I'm not the problem. I think that his mindset is like worth challenging, and that's what I think about often when I see this discussion around the game's difficulty. And I think that's evidenced by the way so many are talking about it, including yourself. That curve at the beginning of the game, that's a learning curve. That's a player figuring out how to play the game and getting better at it. That's cool. That's fun. That's the point, right? But yet some are saying, some nonetheless, I think, see that as the game not accommodating them enough, or they see it through that lens, I suppose. Ultimately, it's a game about using everything at your disposal to get stronger or get through an obstacle. It's an RPG. Leveling up can help you with this, with whatever your objective is. You can equip different trinkets that change your loadout and give you new abilities that may address issues that one has with combat or platforming or anything else. It has a very open structure. If one area is like too difficult, I guarantee you there are at least 5 other things that the player could be doing. And by having there be contrast like that, it forces the player to navigate the world, to explore places, to think, where should I go? And what we're trying to do when we design games is get you to think, get you to use your brain, get you to engage in the fun of problem solving. We don't want it to be that the player is ever on autopilot. We want the player always to be thinking, how could I optimize this further? And so I think the game, like any game we would design, is well designed in service of those goals, right? The enemies at the start of the game, they kill you in a few hits, right? They hit hard. That's because you shouldn't be getting hit by the enemies. You should be avoiding them. And if you if you can tank through them, then the player will do that. They won't avoid them, and they won't learn. If it's a game where the fun of the combat comes from mastering this burrow, then all of the enemies in the game should be asking you to think about that burrow. And I think for so many people, they're not used to a game asking so much of them. And that feels more like an indictment on other games than ours, in my opinion. And yeah, those beginning hours should stress what the rest of the game is about. That's why that knight has a shield. What on earth do I do when I hit him? It doesn't work. I would hope that the gears start turning, and one thinks, well, maybe I shouldn't stand right in front of him. How could I get around him? Maybe by using the burrow. Yeah, it's same with like that first boss fight. I've seen so many people say the first boss was like really hard, but the second was really easy. The first being Hulk Trooper, the second being that fight with Thorn. That's definitely not true. Hulk Trooper dies in like 6 hits. Like we use him later on as a regular enemy, like all the time. Whereas Thorn has a big giant health bar, unique attacks that like must be observed, some that like reveal themselves only after time. He is objectively like a much harder fight, yet people struggle so much more with the first one. That's because they don't know how to play the game yet, and they're running right at Hulk Trooper and they're trying to mash their face at him, and it's not working. Hulk Trooper kills them. And then they have to walk back to Hulk Trooper. They have to spend 15 seconds thinking, how am I not going to die this time, as they go up and then right and then up again. And eventually it has to click with you. Oh, maybe I should like use the burrow. Maybe I should like use the main mechanic of the game. And at which point I think things in general click a lot more. I think that's why maybe a lot of people would think, yeah, Thorn's like not hard at all, because now I'm like burrowing to avoid his attacks. I want discourse in general to establish the difference between a learning curve and a difficulty curve, because one of those things is about baggage from other games, and one of them is about what's in the game itself that you're actually playing.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that like Thorn is actually the first boss, because in my head, like the Duchess was always the first real boss.
Well, that is the first one we implemented. So you may be thinking back to like our Kickstarter demo or something.
I feel like the Duchess was the first real boss that gave you like an actual challenge. I felt everything before that was not easy, but it wasn't like the real first challenge in my head, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more responding to a minority of players, I think, and whereas you seem to be someone who approached the game with an open mind and had the intended experience.
I'm wondering, do you think maybe that it's a talking point because it looks like a Game Boy game and it doesn't look like Elden Ring, for example? Do you think that maybe shifted people's expectations?
I think that can certainly be a part of it. As well as the fact that like maybe because it feels Zelda-y,
Yeah.
you know, people might expect like a cozier, easier time. Um, but neither of those things make sense to me, right? Games with older aesthetics tended to be a lot more challenging.
Mm.
You know, I haven't picked up a new game and thought, how on earth do you like get good at this? Like what it like I need to like figure this out. I'd say like the last time I felt that was like I don't know, UFO 50, and before that like Demon Souls. Like
Yeah.
I like serious like you know um it's yeah, it blows my mind. Um and on top of that, like I encourage anybody who says this game is difficult to go back and play not even Zelda 1 or 2, but like Link to the Past,
Hmm.
you know? Like uh I think maybe people are just not used to the idea of a game where you don't have a dodge button, a game
Mm.
where you need to think about where to stand, a game where the B button is not an instant get out of jail free
Yeah.
card, where the second I press it, I have invulnerability frames immediately. I think people's uh yeah, I think you know, it's easy for us to not think about how much time has gone by, but in between Shovel
Mm.
Knight coming out and now is 12 years, right? There are entire populations of gamer that simply have never seen a game that is asking them more.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would hope that the experience of challenge is one is a flavor that is maybe spicy but also
Mm.
delicious, and I
Yeah.
would hope that ultimately many people are identifying that maybe there's a lot of fun to be had in some of those older games that
Mm.
may seem clunky uh, on account of not feeling identical to everything else.
Now the game does have these modifiers. So I'm wondering, why did you go with modifiers instead of maybe like an easy, medium, hard mode?
Yeah, I'd say when we make the game, what we want to do as artists is, you know, create one game. Nintendo games, especially the ones that I really loved growing up, they would have one difficulty, their one
Mm.
experience. I find that more appealing in general. It's I mean, making one game is like hard enough.
Yeah.
In making multiple of it that you're sure will be a good fit for anybody is also, I mean, that just seems impossible. And on top of that, when you present a player with those options, I don't know about you, but like I have no idea what those mean, right? I think typically for like a modern game, hard
Mm.
means like normal for me,
Hmm.
uh, uh, and and easy means like it's impossible to lose, and normal means it's just not challenging in any
Hmm.
kind of way. But things tend to be balanced for normal, not for easy or hard.
Yeah, it does
It
sound
all
like normal would be the experience that the designers had in mind, but it's
yeah.
too easy for people that play games a lot.
Yeah, and it creates a scenario where it's now impossible not to think, well, maybe the game's better on a different difficulty, or maybe like I'm not doing it right, or like, you know, maybe my thoughts about the game or my issues or my complaints can be summed up and into like a choice that I made. Um, and I don't like that feeling. I like when there's one vision and like one game.
Mm.
Having said that, you know, we want our games to be played by more people. We want anybody to be able to approach the games, and I think that we do that in the games themselves. You know, even in Shovel Knight, which is much less of an RPG, you can nonetheless collect gold, buy upgrades, increase your maximum health, find ways to help you as a player get through whatever it is like you're struggling with. Mina certainly takes that to the extreme. Before you even open the modifiers menu, you can
Mhm.
level up, you can buy trinkets, you
Yeah.
can you know, you can change your play style, you can you have a whole you have a ton of freedom, right? And I think modifiers are simply an extension of that exact same philosophy, because regardless of how much help we can put in the game itself, there are ultimately some people for whom that will not be enough. Either like people with disabilities, or like my grandma, right? She bought Shovel Knight, but she can't get very far on it. She gets to the bubble dragon, and then I mean, it's tricky for her.
Yeah.
And I don't want to compromise, the vision of the bubble dragon, right? We want to maintain that enemy as he is, but it would sure be great if my grandma could like see the rest of the
Yeah.
game, have a conversation with me about like the story in the game, or like the environments or the characters, or the clever little enemies that we designed. But we can't have that conversation because it will never be able to see those parts of the game naturally. And Mina, she can, she can go in there and do whatever she's got to do to get through it. Same goes for like younger kids, right? I now have a nephew. In a few years, I don't think he's going to be able to like play Mina all the way, right? Or like Sean's nephew is very interested in like the games we make and the worlds, right? And by having a menu like this, it is now possible for them to like have that experience together.
Right.
So that's how I see the modifiers menu. More about making the experience possible for people who otherwise, would not be able to. And I think in general, just offering that kind of freedom is cool and fun. That this used to be a lot less controversial back in the day. They were just called cheat codes or bonuses, and like people loved it. I had like a Game Shark and an Action Replay growing up. Those let me do anything to any game, any hex value that could be changed anyways. And I think that was also really cool and maybe a little formative as well. I think that's the first time I started like thinking about games as like things that were made by people, when like some of those parameters and variables started being exposed to me. Wait, you can just like increase the jump height by like changing a number. Oh, and these games are like made on computers, like by people. Like it started like, turning those gears in my head a bit, I think, as well. So for all those reasons and so much more, we've created this modifiers menu that seems like our best attempt yet at fulfilling all of those goals, which aren't new goals. Shovel Knight had like 300 cheat codes or whatever.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I don't use the modifiers myself, but I do think like accessibility in general is important, and it's good to see more games implementing that in their game, to see more developers implementing that in their game. So
yeah, I want to see accessibility taken further. I have ADHD, and when a game yaps at me for too long and conversations go on forever, I tune out. I want to start seeing some toggles for like skip all of this conversation, please. skip all the text. That's my accessibility. That's what I need. and two, I think it's really great and cool to provide options for like the more niche parts of the fandom or community of a game, right? We love speed running. We love a good randomizer, and that's why like we want to build into the game toggles for like that kind of play, not only for our sakes and for the types of hardcore gamers we are, but also for players, so they can make their own challenge runs and context in which to enjoy the game. It's awesome.
Yeah. Now, Mina took a while to make. I think probably about 6 years from when you pitched it to Yacht Club. What was the hardest stretch of development, or what was maybe the biggest bottleneck during development?
I mean, that's tricky. The whole thing was hard, and just for different reasons at different times. It's hard to pick favorites there. I'd say for a while, a lot of the issue is like growing pains. Figuring out how to like work with new people, figuring out how to work without old people, figuring out how to work in a way that is remote. The project kicked off in early 2020. I don't know if you remember, something else happened
Yep.
around then,
Yep.
forcing us to become a entirely remote studio for the first time. Yeah, I mean, figuring out all of those things was a constant struggle. I think we're still learning how to figure some of these things out. And I'd say those things only really stopped being an issue once, we had folded our teams together and we were all on one project again.
Yeah.
But that brought with it like new issues. At that point, it was like, okay, we need to like finish this game up and get it out the door, not only so that we can keep getting paid, but also so that we don't blow our brains out. We all want to move on from this project, right? No one wants a game to take 6 years. As much as any fan wants it to come out sooner, I guarantee you we want that more.
Yeah. How did you keep the morale up during development? Because 6 years is a long time. Like,
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, at a couple points I came in, I like decorated the Mina room of the office. And you'll try to do little parties here and there or get-togethers with the team outside of work hours and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's hard. I think that's an area of failure of the game. We were all very, very burnt out and tired, about the whole process, I'd say, especially like towards the end. So only now that it is the highest rated game of the year that we're starting to think of it in a positive light.
Yeah. How come, like, after all these years of development, how come there's not a single cheese pun in the game?
That's funny. Early on, I didn't want that kind of thing. I remember us like very, very early having a discussion about like, who else is in that world? And when you pitch a game where you're like a mouse and there's like, a handful of enemies that are just kind of monsters, right? I think people can only think about what they know, and what they know is that there's a mouse in the game. And so if you let the thought terminate there, then I think that you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you're making, an adventure, you're making a Zelda-y kind of thing. That's all about discovery and meeting cool characters and seeing what they're like and piecing together the boundaries of a world, right? You're doing yourself a disservice if you have those goals, but then you also say, okay, but everyone like has to be a mouse because it's weird if there's like mice and like people next to each other or something. That was like a really early thought. And I said, that's not weird. We shouldn't like limit ourselves in that way. There should be people and animals together, and animals of all types, and monsters that are neither human nor animal. I think people second guess that sometimes when they shouldn't. Some other games that do that, like Banjo-Kazooie, Sonic the Hedgehog, Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, like everything.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that was necessarily like a hard and fast rule. There's no cheese and that's not allowed. It's more that like, why would we add that? If we're going to add anything that's about like flavor, or if we're going to add something that's about the world of the game, or then it should be in support of that and its goals and the thematics of the game, right? And the theme of the game is not a mouse is hungry for cheese and she needs to go steal it from Dracula so she can have dinner. The game is about a whole lot of other things. So yeah, why spend? We don't want to write a single line of dialogue. We don't want to make the player read more than they have to, right? So with our very limited number of text boxes, we're allotting ourselves. Why would we waste one on something so obvious and something that says so little, right? Oh, the mouse eats cheese. Yeah, I get it. Okay. That was a conversation early on.
Right,
6 years later, we just hadn't really thought about it at all. And then the game comes out and we all kind of had to remind ourselves like, oh yeah, there's no cheese in the game. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably also because Mouse PI came out recently, and that had a lot of cheese puns. So yeah, I think it was mainly that.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I haven't played that game. From what I can tell, I don't think they're going for a wide Zelda world that gives
No,
you the
no,
feeling
no.
of adventure and surprise. I think it's supposed to be funny
Yeah.
and more about that kind of thing. But yeah, one must make decisions, I think, that align with the goals of the game. And the
Yeah.
goal of Mina was not to be a funny game about mice.
Yeah. Before we round up the podcast, I just quickly want to talk about the release and the reception of Mina. When it was released, what was like the first moment or like the first reaction that like really hit you emotionally? Because you were basically, you came up with the concept, you originated it. How did that feel when it came out?
I don't know. I'm numb to that kind of positive feeling, I think. Right?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about it, I mean, I'm sure this is my, unhealthy mindset. The thought isn't, oh, I'm so glad people liked it. The thought is more like, that's what we hoped would happen. That's what I worked really hard to make it happen. If this didn't happen, I would consider that and myself a failure. And so it's more relief that things are going how I wanted them to than it is surprise and delight and euphoria about it. But yeah, I don't know. That sounds messed up. I should probably learn how to be more grateful. It's crazy. Maybe it's too crazy. Maybe it's overwhelming to think that like a thing that I was like doodling in the guest bedroom of the last place I was at with my ex-girlfriend is now a whole game that millions of people have to learn about whether they like it or not. Maybe that's a weird thought that's hard to think about. So I don't.
Yeah. Are you maybe like more receptive to like some of the criticism that the game received? And I'm one like, were there maybe criticism that you ultimately agree with?
Not much. I think I read one thing that I was like, oh, that's a valid point, but I'm struggling to remember like what it was. Usually to me it indicates either a lack of experience with or an unwillingness to learn the quirks or systems that make this game interesting or unique. But yeah, I mean, as designers, that stuff is always, I think, a lot more interesting to read. When someone says you did a good job, they're telling you things that you already know. But when there's negative feedback, well, then there's something to figure out. Why did they think that? I wonder what happened, and even if it's on a surface level, I think it's fun to know those things so that you can calibrate and adjust for your next game. Not necessarily in the ways that people want, right? But maybe in ways that alleviate specific things that, for whatever reason, feel a little too spicy for people. And for Shovel Knight, which is a platformer, the most common criticism there was that it's like unfairly hard because if you fall in a pit or if you touch spikes, you instantly die. It's a game with instant death. Like Super Mario Bros, the first platformer ever.
Basically every platformer on the NES.
Right. It's to me, that's a hilarious comment.
Yeah.
But in some ways, Mina's a response to that, right? There are still absolutely elements in Mina that will test you. And if you fail those tests, then you will be punished. But the ways in which we're playing with that, those can get mixed around, right? In Mina, you can fall in the pit like 4 to 20 times based on how big your health bar is, So what do you think of that, players? Now it's 4 to 20 times kinder. It's, it's mostly fun, I think, to read things like that and think about where these opinions come from more than the what of it.
Yeah. Now that Mina has become such a big success already in less than 2 weeks, is there room, you think, for more Mina the Hollower? Because it does feel like it's the start of a larger world, and I'm wondering if that was always the ambition.
I mean, yeah, I think we kind of think of everything like that. There was never a thought where it's like, we never thought we're gonna make Mina, but like we'll never make another one. Like that was never in anyone's heads ever.
Mm.
And I think it's natural too, as you're working on anything, to come up with places it could go or ideas for the future. Certainly when you're writing story,
Mm.
you have to think about those things, whether you want to or not. And so on our end, I'd say, yeah, there's absolutely a lot of ideas about where we would go with it.
Mm.
If ever there was going to be a game that is Mina 2, I think we know like exactly what that would look and feel and smell like. um, and beyond that, yeah, you know, I see no reason why we couldn't one day like make a 3D one, or
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, a kart racing spinoff or anything. You know, characters, having classic cool characters is fun and cool, and we want like a cool lineup, you know, that we can do all sorts of things with. You know, that's not what's on our minds at the moment.
Right.
We've been pretty laser focused on for a long time
Mhm.
about just getting Mina out the door. Now that it's been what, like a week or two, that now everyone's asking where's it going to go next. And ultimately, you know, we did pause another project. So I think regardless of what the future may
Yeah.
hold, the immediate future is going to have to be, you know, going back to thinking about that game, which is
Yeah.
already well into development.
Mhm.
So yeah, at some point, absolutely. For now, I'm not sure. It also depends a lot on like what people want, you know.
Mm.
You don't want to get too far into planning something like that, because what if Mina bombs? What if it sells 10,000 copies, that, you know, and we think to ourselves, oh crap, can't do that again. Okay, only Shovel Knight games from now on, you know.
Was
Who
that
knows, right?
yeah, was that a genuine fear, or like I assume there must have been this idea like it's going to be successful. How successful, we don't know. Or were there people that really thought, okay, no, this might not be what people want from us?
To a degree, I mean, I think so. um you know, the thought is never like the game is not good and people aren't going to like it. The worry was always like, you know, we know this game is amazing.
Mm.
I hope others recognize that, and I hope others buy it, right?
Yeah.
And that feels like a different conversation, and that feels like it includes elements that like aren't even necessarily in our control. You know, I've seen great games come and go and like not find their audience. It can happen. You know, where the news cycle is at that time can have an impact. What games people are playing at the time when it comes
Mm.
out can have an impact. You know, it's you can't take anything for granted, and you can't predict anything really. And I think in general we try to be very, very conservative when it comes to how we estimate stuff like that. When it comes to like finances, for example, we always assume like Shovel Knight will sell 0 copies from tomorrow until the end of time, and we
Mm.
need to work with that assumption in mind, because we don't know what's going to happen. You hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. And yeah, I think that's more where our heads were at that point in time,
Mm.
is in
Yeah.
preparing for the worst.
Mhm.
Thankfully, you know, our friends and family were right. The game is great.
Mhm.
We are perfect and special. Don't worry, Alec. Everything will be okay. You know,
Yeah.
it seems to have worked out, but it's still early days. You know, I think
Mm.
we're a little cautious regardless. We have to be.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Have you already moved on to the next project yourself, or are you maybe still fixing bugs in Mina the Hollower?
Yeah. I don't gotta fix many bugs since I'm not a programmer.
Right.
Only, you know, there's only been a handful of things that required my attention. Mostly just in marketing mode for me right now.
Ah, okay.
If you're watching any of those TikToks we're putting out about the
Mm.
game, I'm putting those together. That's my voice.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um and yeah, everyone at the company is kind of like in that state of flux, figuring out what's next, fulfilling obligations. You know, we had a whole Kickstarter campaign. We got to get an art book out the door. We got to,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, a vinyl, a CD, a copy of the GDD with you know everything in the game in it. There's plenty to do, even
Mm.
when a game ships, especially for us, since we're, you know, an indie that does everything ourselves. We don't have a publisher that can take it from here. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That could have been a whole other topic, is yeah, talking about not having a publisher, because that must have
Yeah.
made things much more
Yeah.
difficult.
Well, and easier, you know, if Mina did have a
Sure. Yeah.
publisher, it would have come out 3 years ago and it would have been like a 7 out of 10.
Mm.
uh, but certainly in terms of helping out with this kind of stuff, the release of a game,
Yeah.
yeah, a publisher can do a lot of the heavy lifting. But also, I think we like being able to do all that stuff ourselves. You know, we like being able to decide exactly how the game
Mm.
should be marketed.
Mm.
I think for us that demonstrates itself as a lot of like very design focused marketing and discussion. We think that the game is amazing and good,
Mm.
not because of the incredibly appealing art or the banger soundtrack. That's all there to like get people in the door. But what we're actually selling is interesting game design. And so, you know, I like not having a publisher because we can focus more on that aspect of it, which I
Mm.
think not only speaks to the game's strengths better, but I think is just more fun and more interesting.
Mm.
um, so yeah, I don't know, good and bad. A publisher is absolutely the right pick for lots of games and teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, we've talked for almost 2 hours, so I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for joining me, Alec. It was great talking to you, learning more about how Mina was made, and yeah, just congratulations on all the success it's getting.
Thanks so much. This was a blast, and for everyone listening, go buy Mina the Hollower. It's the best
Yeah,
game ever. It's $20. It's so cheap. It's so cheap.
yeah, yeah. I also wanted to ask about price, but yeah, I also didn't want to just bombarding you with questions. Yeah, it's so cheap. I also recommend anyone listening, go buy it, go play it. It's my game of the year so far. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.